Welcome to the 37th CALLERLAB Convention. Today is Monday, March 29th, 2010, and this is, I lost it by this time with all this. This is Programming Festivals and Conventions. I am Dottie Welch, and our panelist is Ken Ritucci. We once had two other people, but neither could be here, so that's why we're such a small group. But I can see through the audience that I've got all kinds of experience out there, so this is going to be a mutual exchange. I'll just start very briefly by giving you a little bit of our background. Ken has programmed 6 New England conventions. At least six New England conventions, and I'm sure other events along the way, festivals of one kind or another. I've done lots of programming for maritime conventions and Nova Scotia conventions, but my chief claim is that I was on the board for the 1982 Halifax National Convention, vice chairman. I was programmer for the 1994 Halifax Convention. I was programmer for the 2002 convention in St. John, New Brunswick, and I am vice chair events, including programming for the Halifax 2010 convention. So, 4 Canadian national conventions, and I think that's some kind of a record in Canada, and I don't know about the United States, but I've been there and done that. So, I think we will start with Ken. He's got kind of a general overview, if I understand what he's got in his handout, and then I'll get into a bit more detail.
Okay, thank you, Dottie. Does everyone have the handouts? I put together just some overview at like a 30,000 feet scope, and I look through the room and I see that we have National Convention chairman here. I mean, this or past or future or present, and that's wonderful because we really want your insight too. Although you may not be actually doing the programming of the squares or the rounds or whatever, you're certainly responsible for the whole the whole thing. There's anybody else as we go along after we both speak and we open it up to the floor. If you've done programming of major conventions or festivals or whatever, please let us know your experience because I'm sure there's a lot in the room. I just like to think, looking at my handout, that you have to understand the different needs of each. And here in the United States, what we call a festival could be one caller for 5 hours on a Sunday afternoon. Somebody might call that a festival, you know. Or it could be a 2 or 3 day event where there's multiple callers, or which it can also include a local callers association and also queuing and in some cases clogging. And now in certain parts of the country, I just called a dance in Indiana about a month ago, and we didn't have a round dance cure. We had a line dance instructor. So they did lines in between and 2 steps in between the squares. So when we talk about programming, please keep in mind we're talking about all of this, although my expertise is more obviously in programming with the callers and working with a round dance or a clogging instructor to have them put their piece of the puzzle together, and then we put the master schedule together. So there is a difference. What one person calls a festival could be just a Sunday afternoon special dance. Convention obviously has a little bit more serious tone to it. A convention could be on the national level. It could be a regional convention like the New England Convention, which is held the 4th weekend in April every year, and that bounces around between 2 cities. Not 2 cities, 2 years at each city. So this is the first year we're going to have it in Biddeford, Maine. It'll stay in Maine a couple years, and then it's going to move to Hartford, Connecticut, and then another, I think, somewhere up in northern New Hampshire's got it too. So we're well planned out, even though, unfortunately, like everything, the attendance isn't what it used to be. We used to have 8,000 dancers at the New England Convention, and probably 150 callers, not even including round dance cuers. So all of that has shrunk. I've programmed the New England Convention 4 out of the last 6 years for the entire convention, and then those other 2 years I just did the Advanced and Challenge. Because I'm fortunate enough to be able to run a caller school in New England, I know all the callers. I know the up-and-coming callers. I know the people who have been around. So lots of times I get asked, what do you know about this person? They've signed up to call, A1? Can they do A1? What's your opinion? So on the New England convention, we're down to about 65 callers, and that's still a lot because we're down. The halls have shrunk too. We don't have 4+ halls anymore. We have 1. And guess what flavor of the month everybody signs up for? Plus. In New England, they all want plus. And there's only so many plus spots to go around. And this sort of touches on working with number 2, working with the entire committee. I have to work with the round dance leaders when I program. We have a Excel spreadsheet, and then I send it on to the round dance leaders. The round dance leaders program their rounds, when they're doing specials, when they're doing teaches. It's not my business. I'm not a round dance professional. I don't try to be. I certainly don't tell them their business. They put together the program for the cuers. They send it back to me, and then we make the final changes. Same with contras, although we don't really have, although I think we are having it this year. You're doing contras at the New England. That's because you're here. So that's a specialty that you'll be adding to the convention. Special events and ceremonies, you have to be aware of what times the committees want that. You've got to block off the time. Years ago, we used to have halls open during the ceremonies at the New England Convention, and then that became an issue because maybe some dancers were there, and the committee eventually wanted everybody in one hall. And so those are things that you need to be aware of if you're going to program a convention or a large festival. You have guidelines. And what I normally do is I just block it out. It's blocked out on the calendar, on the schedule, so that way you just simply don't schedule anyone. Special dance sessions. Each convention is different. Obviously, the national has its own structure, but regional conventions and state conventions, I travel around the country, and each state convention could be totally different. Some will bring in 2 or 3 specialized, not specialized, but maybe national callers or callers from outside the area who get paid, and then the regional callers and the state callers will call. In addition to that, some just simply use all the state callers, which is fine because it's a state convention. Connecticut used to have what we call the Connecticut Festival, and that ran from 2 to 10 on a Sunday in March. And that was big at one point. We're up to 3,000 dancers just for one day. But then as it shrunk and the Dancing Association decided, well, maybe we should start bringing in some of the real big names, get a couple of them. And, of course, the Callers Association didn't like that. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir for some of you here in the room. That's a fine line you walk to. Many times the local callers or the state callers feel, well, we're good enough to dance to the other 11 months and 29 days. Why can't you dance to us on that day? But so those are things you have to be aware of as well. Knowledge of the callers who sign up. You should, if you're going to program a festival or convention, you better have a good idea who these callers are, because it's your job to place them where there won't be any damage done, really, to themselves. I mean, you don't want to put somebody who's relatively new and give them a program that possibly they can't call. Maybe they've been calling 5 or 6 years. They do a nice job. They call a little plus. Maybe you give them a plus spot, and plus isn't their strong point. Obviously, with any convention going on, the nationals or the festivals, the callers have to sign up ahead of time, and they put their preferences. But sometimes, and I've learned this, callers will overreach sometimes. They'll want to do more than they say they can do, especially at the higher levels. I've seen callers sign, oh, I do A2. And I go, where? Where are you doing A2? It's not that I don't want to give them that spot, but I don't want to put them, and I think we have to be blunt here. We have to be fair to the dancers. I don't like to put a caller who's not qualified to call in a hall. It's more in the advanced challenge hall. If you really don't call the program, I don't think you should be calling the program, because you're ultimately going to do yourself more harm. Dancers will walk out. They get frustrated. The committee chairmen are going to hear about it. I mean, those are things that you try to avoid. And it's a fine line that we walk every time we program a convention. There's special dance sessions up in New England. We have something called Fast Track. It's an hour of 3 callers. They don't even take a break. Each caller gets like 20 minutes, and they call as fast as they can. And the hall's packed. Everybody loves it. You can't fit another square in there. It's usually our biggest hall. And we do 3 fast tracks. We do 2 mainstream and a plus. You can't breathe in there. They just love it. And then these will be the same dancers will come out later and complain that so-and-so called too fast in the mainstream hall, but then they're rushing for an hour to do fast track. So go figure. Proper placement has to do with the knowledge of the callers who sign up. Now, sometimes do we make mistakes? I guess we do. I've gotten very few complaints through the years. Once in a while, I'll have a caller say, I didn't like my spots last year. And I'll go back and I'll look at what I gave that caller. And I'll say, well, I don't know. I said 7:30 on Friday night's not a bad spot in the plus hall. I mean, I'd like that. And, 1 o'clock or 1:30 in the mainstream hall is okay. I mean, it's a little bit after lunch. Maybe it's lunchtime, but it's you have to – sometimes people just like to complain. And you have to have a tough shell when you're going to program. I'm very sensitive. I don't like to have anybody upset, but that happens. So I normally give my spots up. I'll call advanced and challenge because I don't even want somebody coming up saying, that SOB, Ritucci, he took a plus spot and we could be using those, even though I'm just thinking this in my head. On a more New England style type convention, that's the way I feel. So for the last 6 years, I haven't taken a plus spot or lower. Because I didn't want to take away from the callers. Like I said, we have fewer halls, which means we have fewer spots. And that's another quick thing is somebody comes and they sign up. Well, I only want to be there Friday night, Saturday afternoon, and Saturday night. And then all of a sudden I have this huge void of callers who all of a sudden disappear for Saturday morning. They don't want to call Saturday morning because normally they feel the halls aren't going to be very full. So I have all these ghosts that disappear and then reappear for the prime time. Well, I try to honor that. I won't program if they say they're not available because that's not fair. But they may not get as many spots because if they say anything, I'll say, well, you're not available for 4 hours on a Saturday. What did you want me to do? It's a balancing act. No matter how well you think you've got your schedule done in the end, you never know. There's always going to be something you can look back in hindsight and say, gee, why did I do that? Why is that person there? And then in the end, all that matters really is a successful event. Excuse me. But you're also going to get cancellations. And especially at the National, you just walk into the caller's room and they'll just say, do you want this? Do you want that? Because at that type of a magnitude, there's a lot of spots to fill. And it's fun to do. I like doing it. I've gotten a very hard shell over the last 6 to 10 years of programming. I feel very confident because I know the callers. If I didn't know the callers and I put them in positions where I think they could hurt themselves, I would feel bad. I know all the new callers. I know the callers that can do the levels. And I'm also old school where I feel in some ways you have to pay your dues. Because you've been calling a year or two and you have a club or two, doesn't make you, in my opinion, in some cases, 8 o'clock prime time. I think you have to work your way up to that, just like all of us did. When I started calling in 75 in New England, the New England Festival had 8,000 dancers, and there were a lot of big-time callers there, and there was no way in heck I was going to be able to waltz in there and get these prime-time spots. I had to pay my dues. And this is what I try to teach the callers coming up through the area that, I try not to give everybody, especially the new callers. You can't give them all closing time and opening time. You can't give them 10 o'clock on Saturday morning and you can't give them 10:40 Saturday night in the singing call hall when everybody's exhausted from dancing from 10 a.m. and they're gone. You're lucky you scraped together a square. I don't think that's fair. And that's the balancing act I'm talking about, is making sure that, okay, you may have a 10 o'clock spot, but, you've also got a 7:30 spot or something. And that's the fine act that we walk. At the National, you've got more opportunities because there's more halls. You've got a third day. But for any of you who've programmed out there, you sort of know what I'm going through. And it's a thankless job in some ways. People say to me, I don't know how you can do it. I said, but I actually like doing it, And I've also been asked by different states sometimes for some help with ideas about programming conventions. And they may say to me, we're having this problem. Our callers don't like this, we don't like that, or we don't know what to do, and what have you done in your area? And so I don't mind lending advice. But I don't want to take all the time. Dottie's got some good stuff, and then we want to hear from our experts out in the audience.
Thank you, Ken. So look first, please, at the guidelines that I passed out, the one that's stapled together. This document was originally created back about 2000. It came out of the fact that after the 1994 convention, people said, we really liked the way that was programmed. It seemed fairer than some of the ones before that in terms of who gets the prime time, one of the big issues, I'm sure you're all aware of this, is someone that calls multi-levels, especially up to Advanced and Challenge, tends to get at a national convention Advanced and Challenge slots and hardly anything at Mainstream and Plus. And some of those Advanced and Challenge callers are our biggest names and should have, in my mind, their fair time in Plus. So when I did the one in 1994, I used that philosophy. I said, okay, let me look at all the people who want to call in the Plus Hall, irregardless of where else they want to call. All the people who want to call in the Plus Hall, and let's equitably distribute the time available across those people. Now, if you have a small number of spare slots, those might go to the people that are only calling Mainstream and Plus. But all those people that wanted to call Plus, I tried to put there at least once. And taking into consideration, prime time, the whole prime time issue, which is a separate one. Okay, so out of that convention came a request that we write up some guidelines for use by the Canadian National Conventions in the future so that each event after hours would have some idea of how we had approached the problem, what we'd done that had made people come away saying that was more satisfying than what had happened before. And this document came from that. When I was asked to do this intercession, I dug it up out of the files where it's been sitting quietly and only looked at the Canadians who have been programming the conventions and said, well, we did all this work. What better? I can't do any better now than I did then. So that's where this came from. It's our guideline. It's been used. It's passed the test of time, more or less. This is only a guideline. Ultimately, it's in the hands of the board that's doing the convention or whatever organizing committee is doing the convention, and it's up to the board how they structure their program. But if in doubt, here's a place to look and see what we did and how we thought about it. So I'm just going to go through this a bit. I'm not going to read all the subtle details here, but just kind of hit the highlights, and then we'll have some discussion here. And I want to preface it all by saying something that hadn't really occurred to me in 94 because it had happened automatically, hit me in the face when I became involved with 2002. What happened in New Brunswick was the committee became overwhelmed with what had been assigned to them, which was in fact way too much. And I was asked to assist and took over the programming part because it was something that I could do more easily from a distance than the other things that were being worked on. And the first thing I realized when I became involved with the board was this was now 2 years away from the convention, and they had not yet set out any kind of master schedule for themselves. And I said, first job is you've got to figure out in a general way when dancing's starting, when it's stopping, when your banner parade is, when your opening ceremonies are, etc. and so forth. So that's number one. Before you even start to think about the subtleties of programming, you've got to have that grand plan. Now, it may change. mean, I've seen us go through 20 revisions before we're done with subtle changes in time and so forth. But nevertheless, everybody that has to fit into that structure needs that structure. You've got a ceremonies committee, perhaps. You've got an entertainment committee. You've got, in national conventions, exhibitions that have to be dealt with. You've got fashion show. Everybody needs to know where they fit into that grand structure. If that falls to the job of the programming committee, then the programming committee has got to do that first. Now, it may not fall in their guidelines or, wherever, but at some level, that has to be dealt with first. So we're assuming that that's been dealt with when we come to look at this. Okay? Space. Space is an issue that has to be addressed by every convention that's involved. So that, and by that I mean you have to figure out, I've got these rooms that can be divided in various and sundry ways. How many dancers do I expect to be doing? Each of the different things that we're offering at the convention, and how do I best use that space? And that can be a huge challenge, and will probably require revisions, because you do one thing, and then registrations come in, and you look at the registrations down the road, and you say, I've got way more of these than I thought, and a whole lot less of these than I thought, so I better shuffle these rooms back and forth, or whatever happens to be. So what does that tell us? On our registration form, we need that information about what dancers dance. That brings you to, okay, we have that information, but exactly what did they tell us, and how do we interpret it? And there's a couple of ways to do that. Dancers tend, if you say, do you dance basic, mainstream, plus an A1, and they in fact dance A1, they might check all four, they might check plus an A1, they might check just A1, and you're left scratching your head a little bit about how to count these people, because, what are they going to do? Now, I know of two approaches. One approach is to fractionalize. So if somebody checks off all four things, then you figure they're a quarter dancer here, and a quarter dancer here, and a quarter dancer here, and a quarter dancer here. You add that all up, and that gives you some idea. Another way to approach it is to ignore all the levels below the highest, assign their number to the highest, and then always keep in mind that if you have 100 A1 dancers, say, that some of their time they're going to be in the plus and the mainstream and the basic halls. So you have to allow for that expansion of the plus and the mainstream halls when those A1 dancers are down in there. One or the other. But you have to think about that. And then there's a third factor, which is, my experience is that not all dancers dance at any one time. And what is that percentage? We figured 20 to 25%, and it's probably rising a little bit as our population ages, are not dancing at any one time. So if you think 100 dancers are going to be in a certain hall, actually 75 dancers are going to be in that hall. So that's your space issue. Now you have to look at your halls and figure out how you're going to allocate your space. And consider what kind of floors have we got, and where can we put those floors, and who needs good floors the most. Cloggers, for instance, are not dancing on carpet. Round dancers are not happy on carpet, very unhappy on carpet. And so, what can you do about that? So that's a whole issue that's a bit aside from programming, but it's all part of the big picture. All right, the next thing we talk about here is, and by the way, I deem it the job of every convention to keep statistics about what they see, so that information can be passed on to future conventions, because we're benefiting by their having done that. We talked about workshops and what one might do. An interesting thing came out of the London Canadian National, and that was that no workshops are scheduled anywhere. People complained. So we're back to workshops again, at least at some level. I think dancers come looking for something that's a little bit new and a little bit different when they go to a national convention, and some time should be given to that. On the other hand, they also look to come and just get good wind-in-the-face dancing. So you have to strike that balance. And that'll be up to the board a bit. But I think that's an issue. It's definitely an issue you have to address. And what kind of workshops is it going to be? Are we going to do non-standard? Are we going to do intro to the next? Are we going to do fast track? Are we going to do DVD? with no explanation, and those decisions have to be made. We made some recommendations on here. I updated it a bit because some of it was really out of date. We were talking about CALLERLAB quarterlies and not there anymore. But same concepts applied. Now, obviously, whoever you assign among the callers to do workshops has to be someone who wanted to do a workshop and who you believe can do a good job at doing a workshop. So now we're beginning to get into the you need caller knowledge. And I'll get to how you find out caller knowledge, but you definitely need that information. And you can get some of it from your caller profiles that you request, but you also need to network your people that you know in other parts of the country who might know something about somebody that you haven't a clue who they are, whether they're new or how they're doing or anything. So you start bringing in your favors here.
Yeah, and it's interesting, too. I think the people in, correct me if I'm wrong, Louisville that are programming, I know they're getting help from some callers, but the official programmers of Louisville, are they dancers? Correct. Okay, right. But obviously they're getting advice from callers, and that's good because callers are going to know, especially on a national level. Just to touch on what you said about workshops is it's really important. In New England, we do send something out. What's your number one choice? What's your number two? And if somebody signs up for workshops and I know that they're not a teacher, they really can't, I just won't give it to them because I don't think that's fair to the dancers. I mean, in some halls, you need to put your best foot forward. You need these intro to the next level, these workshops, these DVDs. I really believe for the success of the convention and the committee that you've worked so hard for many, many years, that you don't want it to come down to where, incapable callers were put in a hall that really can't do the job. And there's some callers that are really good callers, but they're not really good teachers, and vice versa. And then there's others. And that's, again, goes back to the balancing act. Who do you put in these positions?
Another thing that I mentioned on here that I've done, and I've rarely seen it done elsewhere, is that it seemed to me regarding the workshop situation that there might be dancers there who did not want a workshop at all. And there might be dancers there who just grooved on workshops and wanted lots of them. So I thought one way that you could appease both would be to kind of alternate your workshops. So, for instance, suppose you workshopped from 10 to 11 o'clock in the Plus Hall, and you did regular dancing in the Mainstream Hall. And then you workshopped in the Mainstream Hall from 11 to 12, and you did regular dancing in the Plus Hall. Then if you were a Plus dancer, you could migrate yourself back and forth. And you do the same thing with an opposite alternation with the Basic Hall. So now if you're a Mainstream dancer, you can also alternate back and forth and get 2 hours of whichever is your personal preference, just by switching from one hall to the other. So kind of schedule your workshops on an alternating pattern as you work up through the different levels, and to let a dancer have their choice about what they might want to do. All right, so then now we get to the nitty-gritty of this programming process. Now, I've passed out a sheet here, sample caller profile chart, which shows you essentially the kind of thing we've been doing to do the Canadian National. And I actually said, all right, I've got to do this, and I was just getting in the profiles from some of the Canadian callers. So I've, in fact, taken real data off of their profile sheets that they sent us for a few people to just kind of give you an idea of what they said and how one might take what they said and turn it into a program. So let's look at what this chart shows. Tell you that when we first did this, we made great big charts that we stuck up on the board and used those little blue dots and yellow dots and green dot things that you can buy at stationery stores, and we'd stick them on, and then we'd pick them off and we'd move them someplace else, and we had one color for basic and one color for mainstream and so forth. And I've come to realize that, well, you can do it on a computer if you want, but on the other hand, it's hard to see all of this on the screen at one time. So whatever works for you. But some kind of a chart of this nature, I think, is critical. So I've got the callers' names down the left in alphabetical order. I've got the first section there is simply a documentation of what they have asked for, and I'm using abbreviations which I've identified at the top so that I can tell. So, for instance, T means that they've asked to do a tip in that hall. S means that they only wanted to do singing, which might or might not be significant in various levels. I means that they were willing to do an intro to the next level, so that meant that in plus hall and I, that somebody would be willing to do an intro to A1. Non-standard workshops N, and then the different kinds of other things people can do fall in other, because it's critical, of course, to if somebody is a caller and a queuer and a contraprompter, that you know that while you're doing the programming, because you have to make allowance for that, obviously, and talk with whoever's doing those other forms of programming. So we have all these callers, and then we have the schedule itself. Now, I've done a very simple schedule for the purposes of this, half-hour slots for 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon, and 2 hours in the evening. You'd probably be dancing longer than that, and you probably have shorter slots at least some of the levels. But this is just to give you an idea of what's going on. And for instance, the first one here, Colin Aram, did not want to call in the morning. So that's...
Sounds familiar.
Sounds familiar, yes. Okay, so we've got a line across there, doesn't want to call in the morning. And same thing for some other people. So that's what the line across means, is no, I can't program them at anywhere at that point. And you look on down the list. So some people, I'm one of these people, I call everything from basic to challenge, okay? I'm willing to do singing calls. I'm willing to do intro to. I'm willing to do non-standard. So, like, I'm across the possibles here. I'm right across the bottom. I also cue rounds, and I also prompt contras. So
anything you don't do?
There's those people like me, and then there's others, for instance, who are relatively new callers, Faye, up there in the middle, whose name got inadvertently reversed with no comment. But anyway, she only does tips and singing calls, and she only wants to be in the basic and mainstream hall. So we want to deal with all of those things and try to find that balancing act to make the caller satisfied with what they're given, make the dancer satisfied with the kind of calling they receive at any one time. And that's the trick. Across the bottom and on the right-hand side, I'm totaling up things, trying to keep track of the fact, well, have I actually programmed somebody in the basic call at every time? And have I done the intros to at the times that I want? And in this case, I've done intros to in the morning and non-standard workshops in the afternoon, which is something that we've used at several events in the past and probably will do at ours, but that's yet to be determined. Also, there's MC. And some people will say, no, I don't want to be MC. Sometimes you have no choice. Sorry, I know you didn't want to, but I haven't got any choice of the program because too many people said no, and I've got to put somebody in there as MC. And you have to decide, do you need an MC in every hall? I mean, we rarely have MCs in the advanced and challenge halls because there's not enough of us, and we're running around, and the times are usually longer, and it's not so critical. But if you're doing 10-minute times, you do need an MC to keep everything on track.
And the dancers at those levels tend to know the callers already. So, I mean, especially at the New England Convention in the C1 or C2 hall, we don't introduce anyone because everybody knows everybody, and it's not really necessary. But in the other programs where you have maybe newer callers or something, the MC not only keeps the program going, but also it's a nice time to get up there and really do a nice introduction of somebody, because that might be their only big shot, to get up there in front of a group, and you want to make sure that happens.
Yeah, but that being said, we still encourage, even in the Advanced and Challenge Hall, for a caller to be able to say, your next caller will be so and so.
We say that.
Yeah, it happens. So it probably take you time to absorb the information that's here, but what I basically do is I start off with the people in the rooms where my resources are scarcest. So, for instance, I have to program a challenge hall, and I look down that C column over there and see that there's only 3 people in this list that can call challenge. Well, I've got to figure out how to allot them in a reasonable time frame, leaving spaces for them to do other things. And I have to do that first, really, because I don't have a whole lot of options there. I get them into position, and then I can fill in other stuff. So you look at where your resources are scarcest, do them first, and then work your way down to where your resources are most common. But you also have to be careful with the place where they're most common, because there's this plus issue. As Ken says, everybody wants to be in there. Well, not maybe everybody, but nearly everybody, and they get very upset if they're not. So you've got to make sure that you figure out a way to do that. And so that shouldn't be last. That needs to be in the middle of the process somewhere, because if you do it last, then you run into conflicts that you can't resolve, and it's easier to do some other juggling. So that kind of gives you an overview of what. I will add a couple of things that we kind of keep in mind when we're doing this. And one of these is this guy that doesn't want to call in the morning, and especially doesn't want to call in the morning or the afternoon. My policy is if a caller is only willing or able to be present to call for part of the convention, and this is actually in part C of this thing, then that caller cannot expect an equal allotment of time slots.
Right, like I had mentioned, they're not going to get it.
They're just not going to get it. And we've said if there are extra time slots available in a hall after each caller who wishes to call there has been assigned one slot, then apply the following criteria. Assign a regular tip to those who are assigned workshop tips to begin with. So they've done a teach tip, but maybe they'd like a chance to do nice wind-in-the-face dancing because that's a different kind of calling. Utilize callers who listed this level as their first choice and who have clubs at this level, or are traveling callers who regularly call this level. So put in there the people that we're most confident about is really what that's saying. And for halls where resources are scarce, everybody's going to get a second tip, or maybe even a third tip over the course of the event. And if there's not enough, which is the other possibility, I mean, suppose you've got 10-minute plus slots, and you fill them all up, and nobody's got more than one, and you've still got 5 callers left over. Now what do we do? What do you do?
Well, that's plus being the biggest. I haven't had, well, I shouldn't say I haven't, but that's tough. Sometimes I'll ask if some of them want to team up. We do have a couple of combo callers, tandem groups there in New England that are very popular, and they even do dances together. And the crowds love them, and they harmonize well, they work well together. And I'll say, would you two want to split a tip? And most of the time they say, yeah, that's great, because the dancers will recognize that. Then the other thing, too, is if that was their first choice and they didn't get it for whatever reason, I may try to give them a couple of extra mainstream or something. But it's a fine line you walk. I've always tried to give everybody their first 2 choices. After that, there's no guarantee. You want your first 2 choices. Now, somebody might come up to me and say, you know, I really wanted intro to A1 workshop. I'll say, but that was your 4th choice. I said, you got your first 2. And when I send the slots out to everybody, and in an email now, I'll say everybody got their first 2 choices. And for the most part, they've been pretty reasonable about it, because how much can you more expect? I mean, it's not a national, it's not a huge convention. So how many spots can you access, especially if you tell me you're not going to be there Saturday morning, or you're getting in Friday night at 9:30, you know. I'll give somebody a spot at 9:30 if they're getting in around after 9 Friday night. But don't expect 2 spots Friday night, because you've cut out half the evening.
Yeah. And I certainly agree with the team up thing. I've done that in lots of maritime conventions in one way or another, especially husband and wife teams that call together. And if I can't give them plus, I'll make darn sure they've got their fair share of mainstream, or maybe A1, depending upon what the caller considers a priority. What else have we got here? Oh, the other issue is the showcasing one. What do you do with prime time? Obviously, it's an issue. It's an issue in the eyes of callers, and it's an issue in the eyes of programmers. How do we fairly assign prime time to please the dancers, assuming that they consider prime time more or less the same thing we consider prime time, and they expect some of the best callers at those times. And how do you not make the callers feel that they were passed over entirely? Well, one thing that we have done in past conventions is, for instance, the last one we did, we kind of looked at and said, all right, let's put our best Canadians on Saturday night, because this is, after all, a Canadian convention, and we deserve to have that. But we had lots of good United States callers there as well. So we said, let's highlight the United States callers on Friday night. And they were very happy with that. They felt that that was a fair trade.
That worked well.
And it worked really well. And we had enough pretty clear, these are the top of the profession callers, that there wasn't too much debate around from the rest of us that they should have those times. So it worked okay. You have to consider everything you know about the caller and their capabilities and how comfortable they're going to be calling after somebody else that's at top of the pile in a hall that's full to the brim and rocking. Are they going to be comfortable in that situation? And if they're not going to be comfortable in that situation, then it's not a place to put them.
No, that's a good point. You don't want to, again, like I said earlier, you don't want to hurt someone. It's not that the lesser-known callers and maybe the more inexperienced don't ever get some good times. You have to give them good times. Everybody deserves good times. And the more seasoned callers, we don't mind getting other spots because that's what's going to happen. Last year, I had the honor of calling in the A2 hall during the competition. There was nobody there. They were all at the competition. I had this huge hall with 2 squares. But that was my time, and that's when I called. But that's a good point. You look at the National. National's a great example. You look at Saturday night in the mainstream or Plus Hall. It's like one name after another. And there's a reason why they're there, because they've earned it. And because lots of people, the National also does a lot of tours. People are out doing tours, so during the day the attendance tends to be down in the halls. And then at 7:30 on Friday and Saturday night, they're out. They want to come dancing. And you look at the lineups, it's a big difference between an afternoon and an evening, especially at a national convention. And I guess rightfully so. But again, it all comes with earning your spot. These callers weren't there maybe, well, some of them were 30, 40 years ago, but for the most part weren't there. And a new generation came, and then 20 years from now there'll be another generation. And in your own local areas, if you know your local callers, you know the ones that are the bigger guns than the other ones, the newer versus the more experienced. You know that already. I want to leave time also for...
Okay, so the very last thing on here, and I'm not going to go through all the details, but we have listed the kinds of things that we think you should ask to get the information that you're going to need to do your programming. So, obviously, contact information. Then there's the background information about what they're calling, where they're calling, what they consider their experience to be, what organizations they belong to, which a little bit is to who can I ask to find out something more about you if I need to find out something more. And you need to ask them what their priorities are, which, as Ken said, what's their first and second choice, or how do they feel if they call multi-levels? Do they want to be really busy, or do they want you to just kind of pick and choose and give them 3 slots because they want to dance with their partner and whatever? So what's their priority? You need that information in early enough so that you can do your proper job. It's going to take time to sort it all out. The information needs to go out to the leaders in time for them to plan properly and agree that, yes, no misunderstanding has happened between what they sent in and what you've given them. You didn't assign an intro to some level that they have no clues about, and which can happen, or put them in a time where they intended not, where they have a conflict or whatever. So, lots of things to consider, and I know that we've got people here that are involved, so we want to give you a chance to ask us questions or share your experience with the
Please use the mic, introduce yourself, and here you go.
Yeah, I'm John Herr, and My experience is I've done lots of festivals, plus I've been very involved with many national conventions. And I want to make one quick comment, and then I want to share something. And that is when if we're not actually programming, if we're above that level, we got to make sure we pick people who know the area of what they're doing. And we've seen that over and over and over, that we put a square dance person in charge of rounds, for example, and it's a disaster. They don't know the round dance leaders, etc. And this goes for country western and everything else. Make sure you pick people in the activity that they're going to be building their programs for. The second thing is much bigger. I wanted to share with you about something that is available to you. Almost every year, nationals, for example, write their own software to do all their programming and stuff. Most of these people that do that don't know anything about programming, but they don't know how to program, but they don't know anything about squares and rounds and everything else and how all of it really works. I have all that background. I've worked behind the scenes in many different ways. And so I knew all the problems. So I, being a software developer, wrote a program that does all of it. It does the squares, it does the rounds, the country western, the panels, everything. It's been used in 5 national conventions. And just to mention a couple of quick things so you give you an idea. And it solves every one of those problems. Travel transit time takes that in consideration. Cancellations. Someone calls, makes cancellation, you take their name out, the program automatically recomputes the timing of when each person starts. I can move things up and down and all that kind of stuff to change the program. That's all automatic. The profile information that goes in, that's typed in, says, I'm not available, I don't want to do anything on Thursday. Okay. When it comes up to time to put the program together, those people won't even show up. You don't even have to think about it, about whether or not those people are available or want to, because the profile data is taken into account. We have ratings for square dance leaders, for example. And so we have also a printout that shows value to the program. These are the people that are experienced. These are the people who are not. These are the different levels they do, and you have all one one sheet shows all that value. So you know very quickly which people to put in different places because of that. Conflict analysis. It does. It says when you're all done. When you're using Excel spreadsheets, and you say, "Oh, do I have this person in more than one place at the same time?" And you miss it, and it ends up in the program. But my conflict analysis takes care of that. It does not allow any of that to happen. It's intuitive usage. People have sat down and just use it because it makes sense. That's my forte. And that pretty much is it. So if anybody's interested in knowing more about it, let me know, because this has been tried and proven in many different times.
Are the nationals using it now?
I neglected to tell people about it the last 2 years. I've just been busy with other things, but before in previous conventions, 5 conventions have used it.
Okay. Louis?
Louis Friedlander, General Chairman, 60th National. What does this cost to get this program for a national convention? Cost is very important to conventions, be it a local convention or a national. So therefore, we have to consider the cost.
It's $90. And if NEC would pay $90, they would have it every single year. But they don't want to for some reason. Never understood why.
That is Sue Gribble, Program Chairman for the 60th National.
Could you hear the question, though? The question was, does it need training?
It doesn't really need training. I've had people sit down. I started them, and then they sat down and took over, and they said, "Oh, I know how to do this. This is easy."
Okay. Anybody else have comments, questions?
Sure, Gene. Anyone else have programmed conventions or festivals or is going to?
Gene Triplett from the National Executive Committee of the National Square Dance Convention. One of the reasons that we did not get involved with the programming and the computer software was we did not want the upcoming conventions to feel like we were dictating what type of software they could use. If they took the software that we gave them or recommended and it didn't work, then they're coming back to us and say, you made my convention a failure and everything. So what we do is we just tell them what's available, and then they make that choice on their own if they want to use John's program or if they want to use California's program, or a lot of them were using the St. Paul program for several years and everything. But I did want to mention one other thing. One of the hardest things to get the callers and cuers to do is to provide the caller profile sheets. And we're finding that they don't feel like they ought to have to fill them out every year. So we're working on a program right now for our website. If you'd like to go in and look at it, it's nsdcnec.com. And what we're going to do is we're going to put a drop down there where a caller or cuer or any of the other line dancers or country western can go in and punch that system. They can go in, they enter a username, then they'll enter a password, and then they'll enter their profile on that. And they will need to go in ever so often and update it as their situation changes. They will be the only ones that can go in and make corrections or additions to that profile sheet, because they'll have their own password to get in. So nobody can go in. I can't go into Ken's and say, he's a terrific caller, or you really need to get him, or he's a lousy caller, he did a bad job. So nobody will be able to go in and add comments to this and only just update your profile sheet as you feel. Then when a caller or cuer sends their registration into a convention, Sue can go in, pop up on the web and pull that profile down, and she's got it. She doesn't have to worry about getting back to Ken or John or whoever, and that information's available. So we hope that's going to be out in the next 6 to 8 months.
Okay, but that would not address the individual specific when they could be there, for instance, issues.
Well, that's true, too, but that should be on the registration.
Yeah. Susan?
Susan Morris from Seattle, Washington. I was glad to hear you say research what the callers, their experience. Several years ago at a state festival in the A Hall, there was a gentleman programmed, John Marshall, and all the A callers were really excited that it was John Marshall. But it was a new caller, John Marshall, who really wasn't qualified to call A. He danced A, but it was a bad experience for everybody. I'm still hearing about that from... I remember when John Marshall was at the state festival. Really? So it's good. The issue we have a lot in our state at state festivals is callers who are experienced up through A and Challenge only say, I'd like to call mainstream this year. So they'll only check the mainstream box. But they never get a spot in the mainstream hall. They only get the advanced and challenge.
Yeah. And that is precisely the issue that caused us to create these guidelines to begin with. And I don't know, one of the Canadians since then actually decided that everybody's going to get 3 slots. Bottom line. Well, you can imagine what happened. I mean, you could view that as equal. You could view that as equal. A lot of us didn't view that as very equal, though.
Yeah.
So
we've had that problem in New England for years. You touched on a good one, Susan. The advanced challenge callers. Through the years, we've gone through these battles, and I tried to put a stop to it, and I think I did the last 6 years, because being an advanced challenge caller, I know some of them will just say, I'm not coming anymore. I sign up, and I get, C1, C2, A2, and then I never get anything below that. And, I've got a mainstream plus club. They came to dance to me. Why can't I call a plus spot? So then they quit. They don't come for a year or two, and then maybe they'll come back. But that's the burden. And what I've told callers is, look, I said, and I tell this up front, I put it in writing, and they know. Everyone in New England knows when I'm programming. I'll say, if you call Advanced and Challenge, you will have more spots than other callers because you call Advanced and Challenge. You will not be penalized because you call Advanced and Challenge. And sometimes when, like I said, the convention moves around, sometimes they try to combine the A1, the A2, and the C1 hall into one hall. And then you get a lot of complaints because I said, look, round dancers pay their money. Their money's as good as the mainstream dancer. They deserve the halls to dance the rounds they want to dance in. Advanced and challenge dancers are just like the mainstream and plus. Some of them really, especially in New England, a lot of them just go to dance those levels. They deserve the space and the time because their money's as good as anybody else's. Why should they be penalized because there's not enough callers, or we're afraid to give someone 4 spots and you have 3 because you do advanced? Tough cookies. I'm sorry. But the idea is we're here for the dancers, okay? And if it means Dottie gets 8 spots, but 5 of them are in Advanced and Challenge, and you get 4 spots or 5 spots, and you can't call above plus, well, I'm sorry. But the Advanced Challenge dancers or the round dancers or the specialty dancers, they all deserve to have their halls manned as much as possible. I'm a firm believer in that, and anybody I ever program that calls the higher levels will get the lower levels, because I also think the mainstream plus dancers may not hear these callers that much, and they're missing out.
Dave Yarrow, Levon, Texas. I scheduled a Texas State Convention for 2 years, and I hear the pain of what I get out of the advanced callers in Texas is I do not want to live there the whole weekend, and I appreciate that. I really do. And we also have a teen hall, and when we send out our form for profiles, because the 15 districts select the callers, they are given X amount of callers to provide and X amount of cuers to provide from their district. The program committee doesn't go out and say, if you want to call, send us a sheet. It is limited based upon the downsize of the activity, and they manage who they want from their area to represent their area. It works very well. One thing we put out on our form, on our profile sheet, is we always have a hard time getting people to call in teen hall. We get a hard time having people as MCs. We have a hard time people want to do intros. If you will volunteer for those, you will be granted more time slots than the other people that just want to do their mainstream tip and their plus tip or just their plus tip. The advanced callers, we usually get 3 or 4, and we separate, we give them each an hour in the hall during the time of dance that the A hall is opened, and then we bring them into the mainstream and the plus halls and bring everybody together. And it's worked for the last 8 years I've been really watching this. And I've received the same pain when I came in here and I'm not getting a night slot, and it's like you only asked to call in the mainstream hall from 2 to 7, and you didn't take consideration that last year your daughter got $4,000 scholarship for college, and you're not donating your time to the, that type of deal. And it's really interesting. And the next year, that guy that was after me, this past year, he opened himself up, and he slotted himself all the way through plus, took MC the whole 9 yards. So we motivate him by saying you can have more slots if you get into these halls that we have a hard time as programmers to slot, and it makes it a lot easier. It really does. I wish I'd knew about your software, because that would have been great instead of what I did.
Great comments. Any other comments, questions? Anyone programming here? Sure. Bob?
Bob Gaunt from Denver. I used to be in Philadelphia. We did the same thing Dottie did. We had a convention back there, we had like 5 or 6 national callers came in. We put the boards up, the little dots. We moved it till it worked out. That was easy. My problem now is that we're doing a program for a state festival in Denver. We've got 5 local callers who have formed a little group, and they have said, okay, we will come in and instead of hiring an outside caller, feature us. Feature us in the Plus Hall Friday night, the mainstream hall on Saturday night. That takes care of the rest of my, those halls are solid. I can't put my other local callers in there. I have gotten a lot of grief from local callers. We're not coming because they're getting paid. We're not. Back me into a corner. I'm going to make it work, but it really backed me into a corner.
That's the problem you have on certain festivals, and I see around the country where I go. Some of them are, they bring in 3 or 4 callers that are hired, and, I mean, there is an expectation if those callers are hired, they're going to do a lot of work. I mean, they're going to get paid, and they're being brought in for whatever reasons, and there's always animosity from the local callers. We have it in New England as well. So far, the New England Convention has not gone that way. I don't think it ever will. We feel we have enough talent in New England to at least run the festival, and that's the way we've decided to do it. But other state conventions do bring in hired callers, and that makes it tough for the programmer because the local callers still feel they should have some more, and that's even tougher.
Yeah, that's right. Trying to deal with a mix is a nightmare as far as I'm concerned. But I will just kind of toss out to you that on the other hand, I've gotten these comments about, well, you know, our list of people that have registered and have volunteered to call at our convention is up on the website, and people are looking through it and saying, well, the big names, the really big names aren't there. True, but that's not really I can't really do anything about that. They've chosen not to be there. You know, I mean, I made every attempt to encourage them to come, but I can't pay them. That's just not part of the structure. Maybe you can have somebody come in and do some pre-thing or post-thing that would partially cover that, but frankly, I'm an overworked person already, and I can't organize any extra stuff. Yeah. So, you know, but that's another issue, and that's their choice. If they don't want to come to a national convention, well,
yeah, you can't make them. I mean, this is a volunteer activity.
We, Louis Friedlander, we have found in the state of Michigan, we charge our callers to register. In other words, you send me a registration, and you're in our convention. But something we have found is when you do your first tip, we'll give you your registration money back. Okay? And it attracts callers. Yeah, they object to having to pay the $40 or whatever it is up front. But at the same time, they also know that if they're scheduled for 9 o'clock Saturday morning and that's their first tip, they're going to be there because they want their money back. And if you skip a tip 1 year, we know about it the next year. And we do not pay anybody to come call. It's just like the National Convention. They don't pay anybody to come call. It's all caller time. And the better the caller, the more time we try to get him, you know, just like a national, so that they are the ones that are, you know, it's free time. It's their advertisement when they're on stage. And the better they do, the more we feel they'll get hired locally. So.
Good points, Louis. Gene?
Gene Triplett. One comment, too, is keeping in mind when you're programming, you may have a club caller in your hometown that is great for 6 or 8 squares. But you put him up on that stage with 30, 40 squares out there, and he can't handle it because he's not used to calling to that many people. So when you're talking to people about, is a caller good, he's very good with less than 10 squares. But he goes over 10, then he starts to have trouble keeping track and everything. Yeah. So you have to keep that in mind in programming your halls.
And then there's the, you know, well, so-and-so and so-and-so, top of the names, are rocking the hall. Doing, you know, it's supposed to be one of them. Well, it's 2 of them. And they're doing a sing call, and the dancers are bouncing off the ceiling in there. And I'm looking at it saying, I'm next. okay, where am I going to go after this one?
Yeah.
And that's, you have to think about, is the caller ready to deal with that situation?
Oh, that comes with judgment too. I know I've seen some cases many years ago where callers who weren't ready for that were deliberately put behind callers like that because some people wanted to see them fall, and that's just mean. I just will not do that. I train callers, and I'm very serious about caller education. I can't have callers who've been to my school and I've helped them get into associations and get clubs. I would never do that to anyone. I just won't do it to anyone anyway. It's not right. I want Dottie to have the final say because she's the moderator, but my final comment is, somebody touched upon paying. Lewis mentioned they pay. Well, yes, I think that's good. Put some bite into it. We pay to go to the National. We pay to go to the Canadian National. And I don't mind that for twofold. One is, to me, this is a business. I love it, but it's still a business to me. I don't mind paying because I'm giving money to the convention to be successful, to earn money so we can continue funding these, okay? That's what I can give. I give my time in the hopes that, I meet new dancers, I meet new people, I have other opportunities for me. So there's something in it. There's always something in it for the caller and the convention. It should be a win-win situation. And so that was a good point when you talked about paying. I know callers will complain, we got to pay to go. I go, well, too bad. Too bad. The activity needs the money now more than ever, and we need you there. So, suck it up.
All right, we're just about out of time, and I really want to thank all of you for coming and participating. I think we had a wonderful cross-section of information sharing going on here. I hope you find the handouts helpful, and, coming into the future, we do need to share this kind of information with each other. Those of us that are doing this, we have to keep talking to each other. So thank you all for being here, and I think it's just about time for lunch.
It is. Thank you.